So let's not keep you waiting too much longer. I'm sure this is what you're looking for next. It's funny, like I said, I was gonna wait a bit and cover some different games, because one thing I don't want you guys to get twisted is that I'm not a horror-focused channel. Horror games, and specifically action horror games, just happen to be my favorite genre of all time. And I wanted to kind of break away from that by covering other games. But then the Silent Hill 2 remake came out, and to make sure I got the best experience, I played through the original Silent Hill 2 to completion, and then played the remake to completion right after that, and it was magical. And it convinced me to just go ahead and do Silent Hill immediately. But we're going to take it from the top here, with the first game, and work our way through all the mainline entries video by video. When I covered Resident Evil, I sort of bundled them by era, but that takes a lot of time, and it can be half a year before I have a video out sometimes. This will probably go much faster this way if I just break them down game by game. So I'm a little familiar with this franchise, as when I was a kid in the early 2000s, my mom bought Silent Hill 3 and played it. And I remember the subway area and her getting mollywopped by this damn train, and fighting whatever the hell this thing is with the shotgun on it. But I wasn't really interested in classic survival horror at the time. Resident Evil 4 had my heart, and that was pretty much all I gave a damn about. And all the other Resident Evils I had tried, in particular Outbreak, did not leave me with good impressions of anything pre-RE4. Eventually I did find a classic horror game that I like much later, but I still didn't play classic Silent Hill or classic Resident Evil to completion until at least 2012 to 2014-ish. Silent Hill 1 in particular is actually the only one that I had fully played to completion until a few months ago. When I was in high school with pretty much nothing to do, and my PlayStation 3 was in storage, all I had was a shitty Android phone that was strong enough to run a PS1 emulator. That's when I started to get into more classic horror games because I didn't have a choice. So, taking it from the top, there will be spoilers for this game, as well as spoilers and references to pretty much every other game in the series with reckless abandon, as they're required to drive home whatever point I'm trying to make. So be warned of that. Also, I know how defensive people get about this franchise and every single aspect of it. So if you're one of those dudes that gets really triggered by the idea that an old game might be called a bit old, you might as well back out now. I'm not here to coddle you, that's not what we do around here. I'm here to give the game the respect it deserves where it deserves it, and the criticism it deserves where it deserves it as well. So let's begin. Silent Hill 1 starts a little weird in that if you haven't watched the little FMV that plays when you first boot it up, it can be a bit jarring at first as to what you're jumping into. It's a good little music video though, and this will become a franchise tradition from this point, where almost every Silent Hill game will have a cool little opening to go with it. But essentially what happens is that Harry Mason and his daughter Cheryl are on a road trip to Silent Hill, because his daughter has begged him to come here abruptly, and being the wholesome father that he is, what his baby wants, she gets. But he ends up crashing when he gets here, after almost hitting a woman on the road. More on that later. And when he wakes up, Cheryl is gone. Now if you skip the FMV, he will just wake up and you'll be a little confused at the start, but the game kind of fills you in on what's led up to this shortly afterwards. Anyway, he catches sight of her and follows her into a back alley. And then the game wastes absolutely none of your time by having things go tits up almost immediately. Harry ends up trapped in this alleyway with blood, bodies, and hospital equipment everywhere, and is killed by nightmare creatures. Only to wake up and find out that it actually was just a nightmare, and he was pulled out of the wreckage by an officer named Sybil Bennett from Brams, the next town over from Silent Hill, who passed by him on the road earlier and ended up stranded here after losing her bike. Also, is it just me or does she look an awful lot like Cameron Diaz? I know I'm not tripping. Also, it turns out his nightmare was only half false, because this town is fucked. Filled with monsters, the phones are all dead, the roads are out, and the place seems completely devoid of people. One thing I really respect about Silent Hill 1 in particular is that it doesn't really fuck around in the stereotypical way you'd expect when it comes to strange happenings, you know? Most of the time, the main character encounters monsters, then tries to convince the officer that something is wrong, and we go through this whole back and forth where they don't believe him. It's a trope for a reason, it's effective, but it's nice here to just get a cop who's on their shit and is just like, alright, some shit ain't right around here. Take this backup piece and stay safe out there. Anyway, Sybil is off to try to see if she can get some backup, and Harry is off to try to find Cheryl. And now that the game is in proper swing, let's talk gameplay. It's going to be impossible to talk about this game and not talk about Resident Evil and the similarities and differences. Now, I'm not going to give you some deep lore-filled history lesson on Team Silent, the devs who made this game, and their origin stories, because at the end of the day, none of that really matters. What matters is that Silent Hill was made as a direct attempt to compete with Resident Evil and get in on some of those sweet survival horror dollary dudes. That's not to say this game was a cheap cash grab or something, and that they weren't passionate about what they were making, because clearly they were. But it's like saying Duke Nukem 3D was made in direct response to try to cash in on Doom taking the gaming world by storm. That simply is what it is. That's how genres are made. These days, you can't really make games this way because some scrawny, pasty-ass nerd who thinks he's William Shakespeare writes an article or makes a video about how unoriginal and uninspired you are. I've always felt like the term uninspired is a stupid term in and of itself, because to make something like something else, you would have had to have been inspired to do that in the first place. But the point is, when you liked something like this, you used to just get to eat good. You used to be able to tell a friend, hey, if you like X game, you'll probably like Y game. That's a lost art in this day and age, because some bitch gets on this site in front of a microphone and tells you for the next 3 hours about how your game is trash, generic, and unoriginal, I guess. But me personally, I just miss when motherfuckers made the type of game they wanted to play. And that's what Silent Hill is. The #1 game where you used to go, hey, if you like Resident Evil, you should try this. And honestly, in a lot of ways, it's even better. Playing Silent Hill after Resident Evil is like going from dating Sakura to dating Hinata, and realizing that not only does she have tits 2.5 times as big, but she also treats you better and dresses better too. What do I mean by that? Well, Silent Hill is a classic survival horror game with less of the tedium and problems that comes with being one. I love Resident Evil. It's of course in my top 5 franchises of all time, and I cherish it to this day. But there is a lot of shit you have to put up with, especially to play older games in the series. Because the classic games put themselves in a grave that they dug up for themselves out of stubbornness. You know those fucking irritating item boxes you run back and forth to? Well, Silent Hill offers you liberation from that. Anything you pick up, you just carry on you. No bullshit, no hoops to jump through, no running back and forth putting up a fucking green herb in the item box or dealing with limited inventory. Anything you find, you just pick up and keep it moving. Which means you will never get caught out in an encounter or a random boss fight that you had no way of seeing coming. Have a life? Have shit to do? Need to save and come back later? No ink ribbons needed. Just come over, save as much as you want, whenever you want, and go on about your business. That dumb shit Resident Evil used to do where it would hide pretty crucial ammo pickups in its backgrounds that are unseeable? None of that. Every box of bullets is fully modeled. And we haven't even started talking about the fact that you can move while you aim and shoot. I do not know what the fuck Capcom's problem was, but to get this basic, common sense tactic of keeping your legs functional while your arms are occupied, it took them until 2012. They were laughed at the entire 16 years that they did this. Every other horror franchise around pretty much figured out you weren't paralyzed from the waist down when you start shooting. And Capcom just continued to fuck about for no reason. There is nothing scary to me about my character being a goddamn idiot. So we're already looking good, but that's just the basic improvements to the genre's groundwork. Let's talk about the good shit. So, for the most part, when it comes to the Team Silent era of games, the PS2 ones usually get all the love, and Silent Hill 1 is just there. Like, it's not bad, but not really the one most people talk about. It's understandable. I mean, look at it. It's a PS1 game. But you'd be surprised playing at just how well and seamless playing them in order over releases. For the most part. We'll talk about the wet fart that is Silent Hill 4 when we get to it, but yeah, Silent Hill 1's controls and general gameplay loop are mostly identical to the later two games. The game gives you a radio, which is used to hear any nearby enemies and threats, and a flashlight, used to do what a flashlight does, with the trade-off of alerting enemies to your presence immediately. You can oftentimes just turn the flashlight off before you walk into a room, and quietly walk around most threats as they can't really see or hear you with it off. Useful if you're low on health. In interiors, this is a nice tactic. In the world at night, it is so incredibly fucking boring to walk at a snail's pace to try to get to the next area without alerting anyone that I'd rather just deal with the threat and take the damage. Just about the only thing I can think of that's missing from some of the later games is the signature film grain, but outside of that, not much. But this is an old survival horror game after all, so the diagnosis isn't all positive. So one of the biggest problems this game has is the sense of direction and what you're even supposed to be doing to progress. So many people get lost once you get out of this diner and have no idea how to progress, and I was one of them when I first started playing this game. So Harry decides to backtrack to the alley he saw in his dream, which leads him to a note that tells him that she's probably headed to the elementary school nearby. And how to get there is extremely confusing if you don't know what you're looking for. The map, which is usually pretty useful in marking things like points and items of interest, as well as any roads that are out once you explore them, makes zero attempt to help you here. You can find a random note while searching, telling you to head to a doghouse on a street that will let you into the owner's house, or you'll find a back door that needs 3 keys to let you through, as well as a map to where the 3 keys are. Then your map updates, but like with weirdly different markings for every location a key is supposed to be at. So you can be a bit confused as to what you're even keeping an eye out for as far as keys. But this, in comparison to what is about to come up next, is just a slight road bump. Getting all the keys and passing through the house inexplicably transitions Silent Hill 1 to nighttime. And I gotta say, this game is both incomprehensibly hideous to look at, and also really damn impressive to look at. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and bullshit you and say, oh, this game still looks good, or still holds up today, or anything that fucking corny. You have a working set of eyeballs. You see this shit. It's definitely a little ugly. It's a PS1 game. But I'm technologically more impressed by what it has going on more than a lot of other old school survival horror games, because most of the other old ones completely fake it with 2D backgrounds. Silent Hill is doing all of this in real-time 3D, and it's really cool to see this level of detail in the environments. Once again, PS1 game. So it's wobbly and warpy all over the fucking place. And through emulation settings, I tried to clean it up as best as I could in presentation and upscaled it to 4K. There is a way to fix the warping, which is how I play most of the old Resident Evils when I did those videos, but you can't use the setting with Silent Hill because it crashes the cutscenes oftentimes. Graphical issues aside, I would say I think the art direction itself, especially in terms of interior locations and the game's other world, hold up insanely well. It's still got the signature Silent Hill look you would expect, it's just kinda ugly. Also, call me easily pleased, but I'm also a fan of the way the flashlight looks and has the little lens flares when you point it at the screen in this game. Not something I would expect from a game this old. Unfortunately, now that we've hit Midwich Elementary School, it's time to get on this game's ass a bit. Midwich is the worst section of this game by far. And that leads me into talking about the negatives of Silent Hill 1 in general. It is still an old school survival horror game, so all the clunkiness and the annoyances that come with that are still present to varying degrees. The controversial tank controls are in full swing in this game in particular. A lot of people hate them for good reason, and while most of the other Silent Hill games will either give you the option to swap to regular ass movement, or in the case of the later entries, just completely throw out tank controls entirely, there is no such option in this game. Whenever you say anything about tank controls though, if you look over your shoulder, some roach is crawling up to you to tell you about how, honestly, tank controls aren't that bad once you get used to them. Haha, skill issue. They add to the tension, you don't understand. And to that I say no, nothing is scary about my character moving like dog shit, but yes, they are absolutely something you can learn to deal with. And with a little time, they become second nature. So much so that I would typically rather play a fixed camera angle survival horror game with them than without them, because of muscle memory. But truth be told, it is honestly still something humanity should have never had to deal with. If older Devil May Cry games can have sensible movement and still have a lot of fixed camera angles, and they require way more work and skill out of the player, then that says all that needs to be said about the unnecessary roughness of tank controls ever being a thing. And that brings me to the whole fixed camera angle thing. The never-ending debate that actually ended 20 years ago when Resident Evil 4 came out that some people still haven't accepted yet. I mean, all the directors of the OG classic survival horror games that they love oh so much have already come out and said that these fixed camera angles are embarrassing for them to look back at, and that they much prefer the over-the-shoulder camera that has become the default way to present a third-person game. But I digress. That's all that really needs to be said on this debate over them. I mean, it's not really much of a debate when I can't think of a single franchise that is still clinging on to them past 2007, since everyone had kind of gotten the memo that it was over with. So now if you want a fixed camera angle survival horror game, you really have to go indie because no AAA company in their right mind would ever invest big money into this anymore. But whatever, those games are still good. And I think in the end it all worked out for the best. I couldn't see myself paying full $70 price tags for a game that looked like this. But for 10 to 20 bucks, yeah, I'd say that's worth every penny. 20 bucks is about how much you'd pay for the Resident Evil 1 remake, which is like the gold standard for classic survival horror, so I'd say if you're jarring to mimic that style, that price is fair. The bottom line is that this was a point of contention for people even when these games were fresh on the market, so imagine how much bigger of one it is in the 2020s. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be here trying to defend things with a sword and shield that not even the guys who made it defend it with. I'm not here to accommodate these people living in fantasy land. In reality, if you are coming off this fucking masterpiece of a remake here, and have gone, damn, this Silent Hill shit is pretty cool, I'll take it from the top and check out the first game, you are gonna have some serious adjusting to do. And for a lot of people, that's enough to put them off right then and there. They play about 20 minutes to an hour, say, oh fuck no, and then just walk away and never look back. This trend of making these videos on YouTube talking about these classic survival horror games did not magically become popular for a reason. It was because people would rather watch a video talking about the games than play them themselves, and I can't fault them for that. When you grow up in the PlayStation 3 era and up, where games have already mostly abandoned this design for the problems that come with it, it is understandable. Here's the thing though, Silent Hill's camera actually has the edge over Resident Evil's camera in a couple of ways. Being a fully 3D franchise from day one, the camera technically is not fixed. It's dynamic in that it moves and shifts in real time as you move. Believe it or not, it's mostly only the interiors where the camera can be a bit iffy. Outside, just exploring, a lot of times if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't be able to tell it was fixed, unless you start walking down alleys or get close to the edges of the map. And because the camera moves, you actually have a button to pan it behind Harry to see what you're looking at. Absolute game changer for this survival horror shit. When it actually works. It doesn't always work, and you will have to fight with it. The game needs space to pan it behind Harry. And it still does that fucking stupid shit Resident Evil does where you walk into a room filled with enemies with the camera facing away so you don't have a single fucking clue what's going on in a room. Or what the room even looks like to make a decision on fight or flight until you take a few steps into the arms of whatever is in the room trying to kill you in the first place. Even then, the camera will try to fight with you and won't really react to you pressing the pan button. Or worse yet, will pan because you press the button and then pan right back away from what you were shooting at because you moved 2 steps. So yeah, the camera is a bit better than Resident Evil, but it's still not very good. It takes some very good steps forward and then trips on its ass. And you would think that it gets better in the later fixed camera entries, but in some games it will actually get worse. The lineup of weapons is surprisingly consistent throughout the series. Unlike Resident Evil, even Silent Hill's arsenal of melee weapons tends to be a lot more viable to those other than just the knife-only sweats, and I think that definitely works in the franchise's favor in terms of identity. If you only have a low-level grunt or two to contend with, in a lot of cases it can be smart to put away the gun and fight with the pipe or something to save a little ammo. There's a good selection in the knife, quick but pretty ass for damage. The pipe, which is sort of the middle of the road jack of all trades master of none, and the fucking gravity hammer from Halo that is so good it's better than a lot of firearms. More on that in a sec. In terms of shooty bang bang, we have the handgun, the shotgun, and the rifle, which is Silent Hill's version of the Resident Evil Magnum. Nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy, definitely less of a cool arsenal than a Resident Evil game, but trust me, it is all you need. And in most Silent Hill games, this basic trio of light, medium, and heavy when it comes to melee and firearms is the bread and butter of the game, as well as the bonus weapons you'll typically get on New Game Plus runs. Some sort of saw or drill in particular is a series tradition in most entries. They are typically really strong but really fucking annoying to try to use. When it comes to weapons, there's a light attack and a heavy attack. Light faster, heavy slower, you know the drill. In terms of defense, we have a backdash that is so ass I forgot to ever record footage of it, and a strafe system that is pretty useful for bosses and not much else. The problem with it in this game is that it takes so long for Harry to start strafing or running at all that it is maddening to attempt to try to use it. It takes almost a full second and a half of pressing the run button for Harry to start. Here's the problem with all this in the combat in general in Silent Hill 1 though. The lack of hit stun and feedback. Most weapons in this game pretty much do jack shit in terms of hit stun compared to its sequels. Silent Hill 1's melee combat is horrible. Now, ammo in this game is pretty generous, but even then, shooting isn't very good either. Not even the shotgun feels good. Like, you're never gonna fire it and watch something blow back like you would in Resident Evil. There isn't really a feeling of stopping power or oomph in the weapons. This is something that 2 will improve on dramatically, but here nothing feels good, and nothing really feels like it does much until something just slumps over and dies. That is, except for the Holy Halo gravity hammer. What makes the hammer better than most other weapons in the game? Well, aside from doing hella more damage, it's hard-coded with hit stun. So, swinging it, it is the only weapon in the game that even remotely resembles what combat will be in the sequels. Also, let me reiterate, the damage it does is absurd. This thing will 2-tap most of your problems in this game, if it doesn't 1-tap him with the heavy attack. There is no way it was ever meant to intentionally be this busted. They probably just didn't realize the monster they had created when they made it. But by accidentally making it an S-tier weapon, they made the game much more enjoyable and bearable to play in terms of combat. Without it, Silent Hill 1 is a fucking nightmare to play sometimes, and not the good kind. Enemies in this game are fucking annoying. I mean seriously irritating. Now, with the dogs, they're old school survival horror dogs. They've always been shit, no surprise there. But the enemies that fly have full dynamic movement while you're stuck with tank controls trying to dodge them because they're faster than you are. And they are some of the worst offenders, as well as the goddamn rompers. These guys chase you down at double your speed, and the grab and bite animation is so long I had time to go to work for 8 hours, come back, and it had only just let Harry get up. Rompers might be a crime against humanity so massive that you'd be able to trade the entire original Team Silent development team to get a literal terrorist out of prison early. Now, I did say that Midwich was the worst area in the game, and I mean that. What is the problem here? Well, for starters, gray children look really cool, but they are annoying as fuck to fight too. There is no gravity hammer here yet, so you're stuck with the pistol, the knife, and the pipe for most of it. Which really means you're stuck with the pistol. Trying to melee them is ill-advised. Owing to the game's lack of hit stun and their extreme speed, they will delete you before you delete them with melee weapons. I haven't even mentioned the fact that most melee attacks can whiff on them because of how small they are. Add to that the fucking infuriating grab attack where they hold you in place, which makes even running past one a more painful experience than it should be, and I'm about ready to tie a cinder block to my foot and jump in the nearest lake. So yeah, keep your sanity and just pistol the ones you can, and avoid the ones that it's not worth it to. There's a million of these things, so that's easier said than done. You know what else won't make that easy for you? Harry will sometimes just miss shots. I mean, like, just straight up airball. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with this dude. Now, this tends to happen more while moving, but even standing still, it can still happen.
Actually, it's pretty realistic for Harry to miss his shots. He's not—
Shut the fuck up! Alright, so gray children are irritating little pieces of shit. But hey, if you've ever played a survival horror game before, it's nothing you can't handle. But that isn't Midwich's biggest problem. The biggest problem is how fucking obtuse and confusing it is to try to figure out what it is you're even supposed to do. I mean, yes, technically the game does tell you, in that there's the vaguest hint that is ever hinted in the lobby, but it is still just hella confusing. You can fumble around a bit into understanding what you're supposed to do, until the goddamn piano puzzle. Holy shit, way to shoot yourself in the foot. There are people who play Silent Hill on repeat who still, to this day, have no idea what the fuck this puzzle wants from you. They just know the solution.
Well, actually, this puzzle is pretty easy. I personally had no trouble—
I don't give a fuck! It's bad. It's too hard for its own good, too confusing for its own good, and it was one of the things this game got slammed for the most back when it came out. If the game didn't lose a good portion of players in the town, It lost them with the school and the piano puzzle. Now, granted, yeah, I am a little biased. I already tend to not personally like puzzles in games, and this is one of the worst ones and the prime example of why. All the atmosphere, the mystique of the area you're in, the tension of the enemies, the fun, the things people typically play a horror game for, gets zapped the second you hit one of these. It's just a giant fucking roadblock in your way until you fumble your way through it. I don't envy anyone who had to do this shit raw with no guide, no internet, and no help. Now, horror games have gotten better about this puzzle thing over the years to where they're really not too hard or obtrusive to the actual fucking game that was sold to you. For the most part, at least. Fuck the chemical plant puzzle in Resident Evil 2 Remake. But when it comes to these older games, it's one of those things like the fixed camera angles and the controls that I kinda just have to put up with, because once you get past the initial problems when you weigh them, versus the good stuff these kinds of games have to offer, it still weighs in that direction and makes it well worth it. In the world of the internet, if this dog shit puzzle is getting on your nerves, you can literally just look up the solution and be done with it. And it doesn't do that retarded shit Resident Evil 3 does where it changes the fucking answers so you can't even work off memory when you play it. And because I know since I criticized the thing for being too hard, there's always that guy that claims it was never as bad as it seemed and it was quote unquote obvious and blah 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 bitty fucking blah, I'm gonna go ahead and shut that shit down by saying there is a reason that from here on out, most Silent Hill games will separate their gameplay difficulty from their puzzle difficulty, as an apology for how fucked up this piano puzzle was. So you can save it, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Take that shit somewhere else. To this location's credit, when you take away the bad shit I just mentioned, the art direction and the way you progress through it is really cool. This game probably has the most unique otherworld transitions in the entire franchise. They're a lot more subtle. This will become another series tradition. Going through a location that is already creepy enough, only to have to do it again with twice the danger. I've played through every game in the franchise to make these videos, and there's not a single time Otherworld happened where I didn't go, fuck, here we go again. The boss for Midwich is also pretty good because his insta-kill Salazar bite will always keep you on your toes. And once again, I gotta say, not having to fumble around in a fucking item box and guess when a boss is coming up makes it feel a lot more fair when you run into this guy. But killing him brings us back to the real world where, with no Cheryl in sight, Harry hears a church bell ringing and decides to head that way. Would be great for the game to do a bit more signposting to let you know you need to head through another completely different house to get to where you need to go, but hey. Going into the church, we meet Dahlia Gillespie, who blabbers on about some religious prophecy of the blah 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 bitty fucking blah and hands him something called the Floros. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. And tells him to use it at the hospital to find Cheryl, and we're off again. This is also when the game introduces the most fucking irritating enemy in it, the Romper. Their entire purpose is to test your fucking patience and make you want to turn this damn game off. They're faster than Harry, they move much more dynamically than Harry, and every time they catch you, they jump on you, bite you in the most tedious animation that takes about a week to finish, and make you want to slam your face into your fucking TV. But I mean, hey, it's a game from the 90s, and nobody has told them that this shit isn't cool yet. And at least they don't fucking insta-kill you like the hunters in Resident Evil 1, so they're annoying but somewhat reasonably balanced. Getting to the hospital and looking around brings us face to face with Hoffman, who immediately tries to kill us and then plays it off like he did nothing wrong, so you know he's a shady fuck. Also, damn, I gotta say, for a game from the 90s, his voice acting is really good. As a matter of fact, compared to the other Team Silent games with some really fucking awful performances sometimes, the voice acting in this game is surprisingly decent. Nothing compared to voice work of today, of course, but unlike its sequel, there's no real performances here that are so dogshit that they distract me from the story. The hospital here is also by far the best level in the game. The Otherworld transition is phenomenal. Everything is fine until you get the elevator working and take the only available floor, the 4th. The problem? The 4th floor doesn't actually exist, and this is a trap to transition you back into the Otherworld. This is the introduction of the Silent Hill Nurse, an iconic enemy that will make an appearance in almost every game. Maybe it's no coincidence that the only 2 Silent Hill games I didn't like as much don't really have nurses. They don't really have their iconic design yet, but this is the first step towards something way better. They have a doctor counterpart in this game that mostly functions the same way. If you ask me, Silent Hill 1 in terms of gameplay and level design really peaks here. Enemies are reasonably shaped, so there's no whiffing of your attacks, and there's nothing fucking annoying running around like rompers or the flying bat fuckers. This is also when the game hands you its saving grace that is going to make your enjoyment of it 10 times better, and allow you to keep your damn sanity while dealing with its janky ass combat, the Gravity Hammer. This fucking thing melts enemies. In fact, a lot of times it's better than most firearms. The basic concept of hitting something and it fucking reacting to being hit is so foreign to this game that it took what was already a strong weapon on paper and made it pretty much god tier. Weapons will be a lot better balanced in the sequels, well, most of them anyway, which will also fix the hit stun issue, but for right now, we'll take what we can get. In exploring the hospital, we also find a woman named Lisa. Now, Lisa is a fan favorite character. So I know a lot of you will be mad at me for saying this. This is probably the part where I get in trouble, but I don't fucking like Lisa. If you're not familiar with Silent Hill's extended lore, she may seem like a good person in this game, but she is far from it. She is a very, very shitty woman. She is a whore who has been cheating on her boyfriend with Hoffman for drugs. And she ended up getting him killed by Silent Hill's monsters when he came looking for her to try to get her out of here. She flirts with basically every man she meets that can be beneficial to her. Do not make the mistake of thinking she is doing any of this because she is a decent person. Harry is just the next dick she can hop on to try to get herself out of this, and she deserves her fate here in Silent Hill. With that being said, meeting her makes us pass out for a minute, and when we wake up, she's gone. Who isn't gone is Delilah, here to tell us that we took too long to use the artifact, and now we need to head to the antique shop, which is another secret church. But, because she's a fucking moron, she doesn't really tell him what to do when he gets there. The game tries to give you some direction on where to go here by playing a little noise that gets louder the closer you are to the antique shop, which is nice. Sybil finds us here, and they agree to search around together. Remember when I commended the game for not doing the thing where someone claims they're seeing bizarre stuff, only to have the other character talk to them like they're crazy and just tired and etc.? Well, the game fucks up that goodwill by doing exactly that here. There is no reason for Sybil to act like Harry isn't telling the truth about seeing nightmarish crazy shit here that doesn't make sense, when she's also seeing nightmarish crazy shit that doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know, a little girl walking on thin air on a road that is completely collapsed? This line should have been completely cut, as it just makes her sound hella stupid. Finding a hole in the wall, Harry goes in first while Sybil stays behind to cover him. But this leads to him passing out again in the altar room that transitions back into Otherworld. He has a dream where he talks to Lisa and she tells him a little history on Delilah, and he wakes up in the real world and heads to go see her to see if she knows a way to get to the lake. The Otherworld transition forces us into a nearby mall, where we find the rifle and are forced to fight a larva boss. Heading back to the hospital, Lisa tells us the best way around to the lake is through the sewers. The larva thing is back, only it's a butterfly now. The simple effective strategy of shoot it till it's fucking dead still works. Killing it for good and transitioning back to the fog world, Harry makes a break for the sewers. There's not really much to say about the sewers themselves. This is where you'll fight what is called mumblers, who are really just gray children that can climb on walls, so once again, most melee weapons are kind of worthless. It's better to just run past them, but even that can be irritating because the sewers are filled with a lot of dead ends leading to you running past them, and then turning the wrong direction and having to fight them anyway because you're blocked in. But getting around that, we leave the sewers, and this is where the game kinda falls off from where it peaked at the hospital, because it becomes hell to navigate. All the game's most irritating enemies are patrolling and it's nighttime. You can turn off your flashlight and walk to navigate much more safely, but at that point you're no longer fighting the game's jank combat, but fighting falling asleep from fucking doing it. On top of that, the most crucial part of getting an ending that leads into Silent Hill 3 requires you to break away and find Hoffman, which is extremely easy to miss around this time. I mean, we're gonna talk more about that in a second, but for right now, we've entered Otherworld again, only this time it's much worse and much more dangerous. I think this is the point where we've entered what is called Nowhere. Just think of it as super otherworld, because most of the series will never use this idea again. It's just that Harry comments on it being different this time. Regardless, he meets up with Sybil and Delilah again. And Delilah tells him that a demon is taking the form of a little girl and he needs to head to the lighthouse and then the amusement park. Now, Delilah is full of shit and this is all a big fucking trick, but what I don't understand is why she needs him to go to the lighthouse and then the amusement park. Her plan is just for Harry to catch her daughter Alessa and then use the Floros to weaken her, but he only needs to catch her once and use it. From what I understand, she only keeps sending him to different places because he keeps failing to do that. But if he would have succeeded at the lighthouse, then there would have been no point for him to go to the amusement park. Unless there is some ritual that I'm missing that requires him to go to all these different places, but I don't think I am. But whatever, man, the plot has to move along somehow. They split up and Harry goes for the lighthouse and Sybil goes for the amusement park. And while Harry is too slow to do anything, yet again, Sybil is knocked out and captured by Delilah, and infected with whatever parasite has also been controlling the nurses and doctors. Oh, by the way, you can say goodbye to this whole parasite thing after this game. They will never use this creature again in any Silent Hill, which is kinda funny. When Harry gets here, she attacks him, which will also determine the game's ending. And let's break away from this for a second to talk about exactly that, because the way this game's endings are determined is absolutely fucking terrible. The amount of people who get a bad ending because they don't know any better and couldn't have known any better, then get extremely pissed off is too high to count. I've seen thread after forum thread on it. So to get the most important part of the game's ending, like I said, when you get out of the sewers before you meet up with Sybil and Delilah, you are required to find Hoffman in this absolute clusterfuck with all these rompers and everything else running around in a random building, by stumbling upon this bar where you'll save him. Most of the doors in the town are fucking locked, with rare exceptions like a police station and a random convenience store. So for all you know, this is just another random ass locked building in the dark at one of the most dangerous times it could ever be in the game to be trying to explore and go off the beaten path. So everything in the game is pretty much telling you to just speed past all these enemies and get to where you need to go because they are far too dangerous to try to fight or grab the attention of. But that is only the beginning. You then need to go to a random ass diner across the street, open a safe which gives you a random key to a motel somewhere else, and then do a bunch of obscure bullshit to open the back of his motorcycle and see the red liquid so that he'll prance in, get mad at you, and then leave. This is fucking stupid, but it is the only way to get the good ending. Back to Sybil. Saving her requires you to pick up an empty bottle you can find in a room when you first visited the hospital, so that you can use it to scoop up some of the red liquid from a different bottle you can find broken in a different room. Then you have to have the foresight to throw it on her during this boss fight by pausing the game and using it near her like you would if you were trying to solve a puzzle. Also, fucking stupid. Out of all the ways this game could have aged poorly, the way you get the endings is definitely the worst offender. In other Silent Hill games, the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the way you play will determine what endings you get. And they're also saved by most of them not really being connected enough for it to matter. But in this game's case, it does matter. At least in the case of Hoffman. And I am so fucking glad most horror games today have thrown this multiple ending shit in the fucking trash and just written a goddamn proper definitive story, because pretty much all of these older games handled it like Edward Scissorhands handles fucking fragile boxes of glass. Being that Hoffman's conditions matter more than Sybil's, and because I feel like Silent Hill games are at their best when they're a little dark and tragic, I'm going to make the decision to kill Sybil here, because she canonically was never heard from again after coming here in the lore. Even if it's also stupid that saving her is the only way to get the critical exposition to the narrative, where her and Harry talk about the fact that Cheryl is not actually his biological daughter. He found her on the road abandoned when she was a baby, and him and his late wife raised and loved her like she was their own, which will become very important later. And also because to save her, you pretty much have to ruin the experience of this boss fight, which will become very important later, since her boss fight location and mechanics are directly referenced and iterated upon in Silent Hill 3. Also because this is a really cool fight and the highlight of this game. But with her dead, Harry is frustrated. And seeing the girl again, he confronts her and uses the Floros. before Delilah shows up and reveals that the girl is actually her daughter, Alessa, and that she tricked Harry into weakening her so she could recapture her. They teleport away, and Harry passes out again to find himself back in the hospital, with Lisa looking a little rough for wear. She throws a fit about something in the hospital not being right and leaves. This is the final act. With Alessa recaptured, Otherworld has completely broken apart into nowhere, and the layout is pretty much fucked beyond recognition, and no longer makes any sense. There is also no longer a map. This was probably a cool idea when a bunch of guys were in a room sitting at a table brainstorming shit, but in practice, what it means is that it is incredibly frustrating to get lost here and try to figure out what you need to do. What you're looking for is keys in the form of symbols to unlock a door in a manifestation of Alessa's room. This would be a lot more of a good idea if Harry made his own map of the area like James does in 2 and Cheryl will do in 3, but in 1 they just have you running around with your dick out in a world that is intentionally jumbled, and those games doing that were a direct response to how fucking annoying this is. While looking around, we run into Lisa again, but the jig is up. Lisa realizes she's never been attacked by the monsters, but never been allowed to leave the hospital because she's really been dead this whole time and just never accepted it. She's only ever appeared to Harry while he's in Otherworld, and with that realization, she starts to turn, and Harry leaves her to her fate. On one hand, it's hard for me not to feel a little bad for her, but on the other, she did it to herself. Like I said, she was Alessa's main caretaker after she was burned. More on that later. But maybe next time don't fuck your boss for drugs behind your boyfriend's back? She got killed because when her boyfriend got killed after coming looking for her, she got upset, she snapped and tried to kill Alessa like she magically gave a fuck about the guy again. So the main demon that watches over Alessa killed her in response. So as sad as her situation theoretically is, it doesn't exactly tug on my heartstrings too bad, because she pretty much had it coming. With her dead and all our keys secured, we open the door and confront Delilah and Alessa. See, they're part of a religious cult trying to birth a demon to destroy the world, or cleanse it, or blah blah blah. You know how religious talk works. Delilah decided to use her daughter, who had psychic powers, because she believed it was the cult's best chance at doing it. But she got impatient and tried to do a ritual on her to speed things up when she was a little girl, which resulted in her fucking it up and burning Alessa alive. Absolute incompetence. To try to fix what she fucked up, she enlisted the help of Hoffman and other cult members to keep her alive in the hospital's basement. And to prevent them from getting what they wanted, Alessa split herself into 2, and Cheryl was the other half. Origins will explore this a bit more, but when the cult found out, they figured the best way to get the full Alessa back was to torture the half they had until her other half heard her cries and couldn't help but be drawn back. I'm a bit hazy on what happens next here. I assume the person in the wheelchair here is the other half of Alessa that's been trapped here all this time in Silent Hill. So that leads me to think this other Alessa here is Cheryl having changed form back into Alessa after coming back to Silent Hill. So the girl Harry has been chasing and seeing this whole time everywhere has technically been the half that is the Cheryl that he raised. Otherwise, this shit just makes no sense. They merge and create something called the Incubator. Now, if you get one of the bad endings, because this game botched it, this is who your final boss will be. If not, Hoffman will show up and shoot Delilah before throwing the red liquid, the name of which there is no way in fuck I'm going to type in this script over and over again, on Alessa to force her to expel the cult's god in the form of the Incubus, which Harry will fight instead. No matter which you fight, Delilah gets fucking toasted. Now, this boss fight, like most old school survival horror boss fights, is complete horseshit. This lightning attack is pretty much undodgeable. I tried everything. I tried dodge hops backward, I tried running in circles, I tried circle strafing. There is pretty much nothing you can do to deal with it, besides cheese the game by pausing and healing the second you get hit, and then healing again afterwards. Other than that, sometimes you will get hit twice and die, other times you might get the chance to heal after getting molested by it. Besides that, there is no consistency other than consistently signaling the Grim Reaper to come take your fucking soul. Regardless, the fight is dog shit, like most games of its time. It has absolutely nothing to do with you or anything you do or don't do, nothing involving your reactions or skills as a player. It is just based on how much healing items you still have left. Now there is a secret in that the boss will die by itself if you enter the fight with no ammo, because it literally couldn't be beaten otherwise, but without enough healing, you're fucked no matter what. Unfortunately, this is just how most old survival horror games are. They're pretty much just war of attritions. Anyway, after killing it, Lisa shows up to drag Hoffman to hell. The incubator gives a new baby to Harry with the last of her being and dies, and Harry runs off and books it out of Silent Hill. How the hell did he get out of here with all the roads out? I don't fucking know. I assume everything went back to normal. And that is Silent Hill 1 complete. It hasn't aged the best, and of the original 3, I think it is the weakest, but it is pretty damn humble of a beginning before greatness of its sequels. It's got everything that they have for the most part, it just isn't polished up yet. Just look at the outro and the grindhouse charm. Between this and most of the classic Resident Evil games besides maybe Resident Evil 3, I'd still say even with all its problems, this is the better pick. It made a lot of smart decisions that made people think twice about Resident Evil as the only big dog in town. Not only that, but like I said, it throws out some of the things that people don't like about old school Resident Evil, and creates a much more smooth experience because of it. This is also, funny enough, pretty much the only Silent Hill game, save for the reimagining, where the protagonist being stuck here has nothing to do with anything he did necessarily or any mistakes he made. They haven't gotten the definitive Silent Hill blueprint down just quite yet, but I think, all things considered, it turned out pretty good. And for all its faults and everything I've bitched about, out of all the Team Silent games, it is still better than whatever the fuck Silent Hill 4 is supposed to be, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. This game could have aged a lot worse than what it did, and it's still close enough in gameplay to Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 to where I'd say it is still well worth playing if you're interested in those two games. Speaking of which, the PS2 is on the horizon, and with it comes the point in time where Silent Hill walked up to Resident Evil and became the battlefield to Resident Evil's Call of Duty. Bitch slapped it in the face and put this series on the map for good with Silent Hill 2.